Hey, welcome back to another Friday Tech Workshop. I'm Joseph, a senior developer advocate with Appsmith, and in today's workshop, we're going to cover two topics in one. First, we're going to be building a simple CRUD app using the Baserow API. It's going to be fairly beginner focused and just cover some basics about how to create a CRUD app, how to start your data source, displaying data and editing it. So from that perspective, it's more of a beginner workshop. But we're also going to sprinkle in a bunch of best practices, some tips and tricks, 3 different ways to create an API. We're going to look at some keyboard shortcuts and also how to create an authenticated API data source to make sure that your credentials are never exposed to the end users. So on the surface, it's kind of a beginner workshop, but with some good tips in there to make this some interesting content for more advanced users as well. So let's go ahead and get started by creating a API token for the Baserow API. Okay, for this video, I'm going to be building a CRUD app on top of this applicant tracker database. This is a template that's in the Baserow library, and I'm going to use the position table here. So it's a list of job positions, and it has a good mix of some text fields, some drop down or select fields. There's this Boolean check mark, we got a number, and then this is like the related list of people that have applied. So we're going to build a CRUD app on top of this data, and I want to show you where to get your copy. So let me back out to the dashboard here. And then you may have to create a workspace if you don't have one yet, but you'll want to pick whatever workspace you want to build this in and click Create New, and then From Template. And in here, there's a ton of them. So go to the HR section, and there's this applicant tracker. So we're going to build a CRUD app on top of the positions table here from the applicant tracker. And you can click use this template and it'll make a copy in your workspace. I already have one, so we'll open this up. And so like I said, we're going to use just the position table for this example. To get started, you make your copy of the template and then go up here to the settings and to database tokens. And then find that workspace, and you want to make sure that you set up the scope here to enable create, read, update, or delete specific to your use case. So if you're building like a reporting app and all you need to do is read the data to be able to display it, then I would turn off create and update and delete for that particular use case. It just depends on what you're doing, but only give it the permissions that you need. So this is the set of options that apply to the token. Right here, this little menu, you can copy the token itself right here. And then there's a link to the API docs. So I'm going to open that up in another window here, and we'll go back to the database. So I've got this token copied, and we'll check out the API docs here. So this takes you to a list to choose the doc that you want to view. Like it's specific to each table. And so if I choose the applicant tracker here, here's the position table. And you'll see that all of the documentation here, it's specific to every individual table with the exact field names. The table ID is right here in the URL. So it makes it a lot more convenient to get started because you don't have to swap out a bunch of placeholders. Some APIs will just say table ID right here, and you have to insert all those things. And so this makes it really easy to like copy the sample curl request or the API and the response or like the list of fields. So we're going to be using this several times. We'll be coming back to this. But to start out, what I want to do is first we're going to do a curl import to create the first API. And let's go to the position table here. The first thing is just the list of fields. Okay, this is not a list of records or the rows of data yet. So each one of these starts out with, here's the interviewers table, its list of fields. There's references. So each table, we'll go back to positions here, has the endpoint to list all of the fields. And then after the field list there, then it's listing the rows. That's the one we want to use. So I'm going to copy this curl request and This will let us import a curl request with the exact table here. There's the table ID, but it just says database token here, and then you have to insert your token. So we'll copy this, and coming back here to Appsmith, I got an empty app, and first I'm going to use a curl import. So go to the plus here to add a new data source, and there's a curl import option right here. We will paste in the curl request and then replace the database token here. So got to go back, and I copied that early. Ended up needing the curl request first. So that we'll paste in the curl, then copy the token and put that in place here. And so I'm going to import this, and by the time you watch this, I'm going to come back here and regenerate this token. If this gets exposed, if it's shown to other users, you know, or been a text file or whatever it is, that can expose your data to somebody else that could use that token. So come back here and generate that token if you need to. So I'm going to import now. And if we run this, you'll see that I'm getting data back, just pasted in the curl request, added the token, and it's ready to run, and I'm getting back rows of data. Now, if I remove this and run it again, then we get a 401 unauthorized. So that header, that authorization header is needed in order to get the data to be authorized, but you don't want it right here in plain text like this. So we're going to save this as a data source, but first let me name this. And this is for the position table. So I'm going to say get positions. All right, and it should be working again now that I added the token. So we're going to save this as a data source. And when you do that, it's taking that root URL, and it can be reused on other APIs and still add in that token. So you don't have to keep adding it to the next API every time that you use a new endpoint. So I'll call this Baserow applicant tracker, and I'm going to save this and just test it again. Now, notice how there's this blue background here to the root URL. That part is going to be added to any API that's under this data source. So we have a single API, but it's part of a bigger data source that's inheriting that API header. And I want to run this again just to make sure it's working. It is. And so we could add other APIs to this data source now, but I'm going to go back and edit the data source first, because you can see that token right here. It's in plain text as a normal header, and it's not actually secure. So we're going back to edit the data source. So I'm going to cut the token from here, and we'll use the authentication type down here, choose API key. And then notice how there's this encrypted field now with the green lock icon. This will get saved back to the Appsmith server, and it won't be exposed to the end user. It won't get sent out every time somebody views the app. So the key is the header here, authorization. And the header prefix is token. That was the extra string that gets added. So it's header, authorization, the word token, and then your database token. So what we're doing is removing this header and just moving those values into an encrypted field. So now I'm going to save this one more time and retest. You can see that that value is not available here now, and it's also not going to be shown if you were to right click and inspect and look in the console, right? So even though you're not seeing it on the front end, it could still be getting exposed to the end users if you're not careful. So we'll go back and run that one more time. And so it's still working, and now it's secure. So the first method there, we imported a curl request and then saved it as a data source. And now all we've done is taken those credentials and made it secure. But the first method there to create an API was through importing a curl request. Okay, so next we're going to create an API under this data source. So the second way that you can create one is by choosing the data source first. And then we're going to start a blank one here, and then you can change the method or whatever. But it's starting out by being part of that parent data source, which is adding in the header, and it'll already have the authentication that we need, the authorization rather. So we could go to this other table here, the applicants, and I'm going to get the list rows. There's list fields and then list rows. So I just need to copy the rest of this after the domain. And we will paste that here. Oh, I got an extra slash. All right, so I'm able to get data from another table now. It's still part of the same database in Baserow. It's all part of this container with multiple tables here. And the same one token is going to work for any of them in that workspace based off of these settings right here. So you could individually turn off any one of those tables if you wanted. All right. So this is a different table. We're not actually going to build on that one. Just wanted to show another method for creating an API there. And the last method then is just to create a blank API that's not part of a data source. So right here, new REST API. And then you have to paste in each piece, the URL, the header, parameters or body, if there are any. So you can build it from scratch like that, piece by piece. But I prefer to use the curl import the first time around. And that fills in the URL and the headers that are needed, anything extra like that. Save it as a data source, and then start adding all the APIs to that data source. And that way you only have to add the authentication, the authorization header that one time. So I'm going to delete this one since we're not going to use it. And so those are the three different ways that you can create an API. Then there's also the keyboard shortcuts, which this is just a way to get to this new menu. So depending on Windows or Mac, you'll see the shortcut options here. I'm on a Mac, so I can do Command Shift plus to bring up that menu. And then from here, you can use like type ahead. So I'm trying to add an API, and I can just hit enter on that one. So just a couple keyboard clicks, start typing what it is that you want to add and click enter. Or you can just use that to bring up the menu, and then I've got a huge list of data sources. You probably won't have that many. But this is a way to get to a few of those things, and it could create the curl import or the blank API or one under the data source. So this isn't really a fourth method, but a different way to get to those three. Okay, so I'm going to delete this extra API here. Let's get back to actually building our CRUD app. Okay, so we looked at three different ways to create an API. Now we're going to look at three different ways to connect that data to a table widget. So the easiest way is just to click the Bind Data button right here. So the easiest way is just to click this Bind Data button right here. And this will give you an option to add a new table widget, a new select, or a new chart, and it will connect the API response to that widget. And one click, it adds the widget itself. It connects the binding here. It references the API and links it to the table. And it also set that API to run on page load. You may have saw the alert there pop up just a minute ago. And so this API, the setting is now set to run on page load so that there's something to display in the table. And this was not on by default, but that bind data button, it does all three of those things for you. It's adding the widget, linking it to the API response here, and setting it to run on page load. So I'm going to delete this, and you'll see it's no longer going to execute that API on page load. So it automatically turns it on for you, and it turns it off if you delete that table. So the second way then is that we can just do those same steps one at a time. I'll drag in the table widget, connect it to that query, and you can see it goes to the dot results because this particular API, it has the dot data like all of them do, and then the actual rows of data are inside that results array. So there's two steps there, and then it still set the API to run on page load for us. by connecting it to the table widget. So that's done automatically either way. But there's kind of 3 steps there that you actually have to add the widget, bind the 2 of them, and then set it to run on page load. And this setting's done automatically. And then the third way that you could link all of these, so that you can take your API data and display it in a table. Instead of referencing the API directly, we can filter or transform or somehow manipulate this data first with JavaScript and then reference that right here. So I'm going to add a new JavaScript file here, new JS object, and we will clear all of this out except for the function. I don't want the variables there, and we're not going to use an async function, so I got rid of that keyword there. So first, let's just return the data coming back from our get positions API. And we want the results array inside of that. So if I run this, it's the exact same thing that we're looking at over there in the table widget, but I'm just going to swap this out and reference it. I should probably name that something. All right, now I'm going to reference that right here. So instead of it being that get positions API, we're looking inside JS object 1 for that function called get positions. So far, it hasn't really changed anything. We're just referencing it from a different source. But this lets you go write some code now where you can filter, transform that data, and reference it here so that it's not directly coming from the API. You can do something to it first. So it's linked again, and it's working. We can come over here now and filter this. So instead of just returning it as is, I could say .filter. And then we would use an arrow function here. And inside of here, you say how you want to filter it. So we have different variables that you can pass in here. The first one is going to be the object itself. In this case, it's just a row of data from that position table. So we have a row that we're passing in, and then we want to do something inside of this function, which could be to return something else, right? If I say just return row, it's not going to do anything different, but let's make sure that still works. So here we're filtering the data, and we're just returning the exact same thing, right? It's if there's data there, then just still return it. But what if we say return if the row ID equals 3, just to make it easy so we can see this first one. So if row.id equals 3, and then you'll see that if I collapse this object here, I only have one row coming back now. So let's get rid of that condition. Run it again, collapse that first object. There's another row. Okay. So let's see. Let's leave this in here and run it. And then if I come back to the table now, you see there's only a single row. So if you need to transform or filter data, if you want to rename columns, whatever it is, that would be the third way then. Instead of using the bind data or manually linking it, you can transform the data here first with JavaScript and then take that output and link it to the table. Okay, so we went over 3 different ways that you can connect the response from an API to the table widget. That bind data button is the easiest way. You can also do that same method manually here. Just reference the API and go to the .data, and then in this case, it has a .results array. Or you can use a JS object. So for now, I'm going to leave it connected directly to the API, and we'll go ahead and finish up working on our CRUD app for this one table. So first thing I'm going to do is hide the ID column here. You can just toggle the visibility here, and same with the order. We don't need to see this. This is just used in Baserow when you reorder columns here. If you drag them around, and you won't even see the option unless you turn off of the sort. So if the sort is on, then that's doing it for you. But if you turn off sort, then you can reorder rows like that. And in the background, it's updating this order column. So that's how it's actually sorting it, is by changing that number. We don't need to see that one. This applying for position, this is a list of the related records from the other tables. And we're building on top of this existing database that's, it has relations. It's got multiple tables here and they're related. So this applying for position, if I go to edit field here, link to table, okay? So it's an array of objects representing the other rows from the applicant's table. We're not going to do much with that in this demo. So we're going to ignore this column for this demo and just build a CRUD app on top of the text field and the select here. We got a Boolean and another text and a number. And then the relationship column here, you have to give it a drop down of the IDs for the other table. And that's a little more complex, so we're not going to look at that today. We're not going to build a multi-table relational CRUD app today. This demo is just about a single table and how to edit it. And then we'll get into the relationships and building like a drop down, a lookup list of those records. That would be like a little more advanced in another video. So we're going to hide that column as well. And so we just want to see the title, if the position is filled or not, the description, and then if you look at the department here, so this one, the department, is not an array. The one that we just hid there, the list of people applying, that's an array. The department is just an object that has the value, which is the thing we really want to see, but it also has an ID and a color. So to get this column displaying right, go to the, so I've got the table widget selected here. Go to the settings for that department column, and we're going to change the computed value right here after the bracket to just dot value. And so it'll reference that whatever's inside that object and get down to the value. And you could use the color as well if you want to reference that in the style. There's also the ID, which when you go to create a new row, you can use the ID or the value, the text label. So you really don't need the ID because of the way their API works. You can just give it the text value. So we've got our text column here displaying now. We fixed the select field. This one is true or false if you look in the API. So we'll run this and look at the raw data here. And so that is filled is a Boolean field with a true false, but then the table has detected the data type. And so if you look here, it's set to a checkbox, but you could make it text just to see the word true or false. You could change it to like a color or an icon. There's a bunch of stuff you could do based off of the value, but we'll use just the text label for now. And I think that's it for display. So now I want to delete a row. That's going to be the next easiest thing. We've got the get part or the read of our CRUD app, and now we're going to do delete. And so to start out with, I want to add a delete button right here on each row. So we'll go back to the table widgets settings here and add a new column. So here you can rename this. We'll call it delete, and then go into the gear setting here. And instead of plain text, I'm using an icon button. I'm going to change this to a trash can icon, and we'll make it red. All right. So when you click this button, that's back on the content side here for the on click. I want to connect this to a delete query, but we don't have one yet. So we'll go back to the API docs, and we're going to the position table. There's the fields first, and then the rows. And we are looking for, there's create row, we're looking for delete. Okay, so we need everything after the domain here. I'm going to copy all of this, and then we'll add a new API underneath our data source. You can also go to the data source itself and add it from there. So I'm going to go to edit data source, and then there's a new API button here. So there's a couple ways to get to that, and it's still linking it underneath that data source. So we'll add an API, change it to a delete, and then I'm pasting in the rest of that URL. Now here we need a row ID, and we want that to come from the table widget. I'm going to name this first though. Okay, so the row ID here, we add another set of curly braces so that we can reference the table widget. And there it is. It's already the top result here. The suggestion is the table 1 selected row. So whatever row the user is selecting, you could pull the ID from that row, and that's the one that would get deleted. Now, if we do that, there's a chance that the user could have one row selected, but they click the delete button from a different row. So to make sure that you're actually getting the right row, instead of using the selected row right here, we can use triggered row. So there's a different object that represents the row that just got clicked, and we want to take the ID from that row. You'll see that it's not giving us a value right now because there's not a row that's being clicked. No row is triggered right now. Whereas the selected row, it persists. You know, if the user clicks the row and then you come here to look at it, you'll still see it, but that triggered row isn't happening right now. So we have a reference to it, and now we want to test it out. But first, I'm going to the settings, and we're going to make this API request confirmation because we're actually deleting a record. So it's just a good practice to have that this option here turned on to make it request confirmation from the user. So now we can go back to the UI, and I want to connect this button to the delete query. So the on click, we're going to execute a query, and we'll use the delete position here. And then on success, I want to see that the row's gone. It will work if I just click it right now, but I won't see a change because we have to repopulate that full list with the new record that's been removed. So on success, we'll rerun the get positions, and now we should be able to test this out. Okay, so I'm going to test out on this top row here, and we got our confirmation. And then there it is. So it deleted the top row, it showed the confirmation, and then it refreshes the whole table when you rerun that callback to get the positions again. So we've got half of our CRUD app. We're able to get or read the rows and then delete. Next thing we're going to do is update because creating is actually the one that's got the most involved in it, basically. So we're starting with the easiest and kind of working up. So next I want to have a button to edit one of these rows. So we back up here and we will add another button. Call this edit. And I'm also making this one an icon. I think there's like a pencil. Yeah, it's called edit. And then when you click this, I want to bring up a modal so that we can edit the row in a JSON form. Now you can also use the table widget here. You can also enable editing and do that at the row level here. That's a little more complex, and it's the JSON form that we're going to use is a little easier to set up. So we're going to start with that today. So inside this edit column, I'm going to move this edit to the top so we can see it easier. So here's our edit button. And we'll go into these settings then for that edit button. On click, I want to show a modal. And we don't have one yet, so there's a new modal option here. And now this button will pull up this modal where we can put our form. So we're going to use a JSON form, and it actually has its own reset and submit button. So I'm deleting both of these. You can also use this modal and do the form one field at a time and drag in a new widget for every single input. But the JSON form, it'll handle all of that at once and the buttons. So now we got to connect this form to some data. So the generate form here, we want to generate it from the table. And if you just select that table that you want to connect it to, it knows to use the selected row. you can toggle this source here. There's a JS option. And if you turn that on, you can see under the hood, it's actually use the binding table1.selected row. So whenever the user clicks a row, when they select it, it's going to pull up that link there, right? But just like the delete, it's possible to have one row selected, but then click the edit button from a different row. So just to be safe, we want to use triggered row. Okay? And now whenever the user clicks this edit button, whatever row triggered that, that's the one you're going to be editing instead of the one that's selected, just in case they don't click the right row. So now, just like the table widget, we're going to hide a few fields here in the form because we don't want the user editing the ID. Maybe you want them to reorder it here, but really dragging it is better, so it's not really made to do in a form. So now we've got our text fields here. We got a few different text fields. This budget field is actually a number, but it looks like a text field because there should be a number input here. So if I change this to number, now you see we get this arrow here, and you might not enter that big of a number, clicking like this, but the number type is going to also give you the min and the max values, whereas if it's text, then you've got a different type of validation. So you might want to use that just to be able to set the validation. Okay, we're almost done with the form. We got one field left here for the department, and this one should have a list of fixed values. Right now, it's going to let the user type whatever, and they might have a typo, or they might use lowercase or whatever. So just to keep the field consistent, we want to make this a select field. So we'll back out here and go to the department settings. And if you change this to a select, now you can have some fixed values here. And so you can see the structure. It's an array of objects that has a label and a value. And then you have to type out the actual value that you want to use for each one. Actually getting that list from the API, it's possible. It's a little more involved than we want to do in this video. So I am just going to paste in the values and provide this in the tutorial. There'll be a link in the bottom with a written tutorial version of this. And if you just want to copy it from there to keep things simple for today. And then in another video, I'm going to go over some of the more advanced things that we're skipping over here in this one. So now you can see that this has that list of values. That's the structure it should have. It's an array of objects with a label and a value. So we are able to fill out the form now. We got everything built to where we can click edit, pull up this form, and click submit. So now we've got just the fields that I want in the form, but we need an API to actually run to update the row when we click submit. So let's go back to the API docs, and we are looking under the position table for updating a row. So this is a patch, and I want to copy everything after the domain here. And then we're going to add a new API under the same data source. So I like to use that button right here that's part of the data source, and so that you know you're viewing the right data source and you're building it under the right one. And we will change this to a patch, paste in the rest of that URL, and we'll call this update position. Cannot type today. Okay. Now, most of this is ready here. We still need to tell it what row we're updating and give it the data. So for the row, we'll add another set of curly braces here to this placeholder. And now we can reference stuff with JavaScript. And we want to take the ID from the row that's in that form. So we can reference the JSON form. And then inside of there, there's the source data that populated the form. And we want to get its .id. So the same source data that populated the JSON form, we're getting its ID, and then we're going to update that row. And then here inside the body, I'm using the double curly braces, mustache syntax, so that we can type all of the references to the fields here. And if you look at the API docs, this update, the data would be an object with all of those fields, property name and a value. We don't want to type all that out though. We can just reference the form itself. So right here, JSON form.form data. So there's a few things inside the JSON form. The source data is what started out populating the form, but then the user is going to change stuff. And for that, you want to read the values from the form data. And then this is showing only the objects that we left visible, and it's pulling out the ID that we don't want in there, and the order field and the other things that are available in the source data. So you can see the ID is here and the order, but here is only the fields that we made visible in the form, and it's also only and it's also updated. It's showing their edits as opposed to what initially populated the form. So almost there. We've got the API now. We have a edit form. And then here, when I click submit, we'll go to the JSON form, events, and on submit, we want to run that update position. And then we also want to see the table in the background, actually see it change. So on success, we have to run the get positions query again to see the change and actually see what happened. And then we want to add one more callback. So here we've got the first level callback is update the row, on success, get all of the rows, but this modal is still going to be open and in the way. So when we link the first action, there's this drop down, and you can choose which action you want here. And then for the callback on success, there's also that drop down to pick which action. When you get to the third level though, you have to just type the JavaScript here. So at this point, we're just going to write our own function, and it's already there as far as the opening and closing part of the function. So just one line here to close the modal. We want to close modal, and then the modal name, which right now the modal name is just modal1. So we should probably change that when we end up having two modals here in a minute. But for now, I'll reference the one that we have, modal1. And I think this is ready to test. So let's check out a row over here. And I'm looking at the sales rep position at 75. Let's change that to 85. And even though they're in sales, we'll move it to marketing just to test this out. We're looking at, where is it? Here it is, sales rep. So hopefully this will run the patch, that update. It gets all the new rows and then close the modal for us. And so let's see, sales manager, sales rep. There it is. And it is in marketing now, and it shows as 85,000. So the last step then is to create a row, and we'll have our full CRUD app. So I'm going to add a button here at the top. We will put add new button up here. And then I'm going to make this open a different modal with another JSON form. So on click, show modal, and we have our existing modal1 here. I'm going to create another one, and we will call this modal. I like to use a three-letter prefix anytime I'm naming widgets. So whatever widget type it is, and then its purpose. This is create position. And then this way, when you're referencing your widgets, you don't have to remember the exact name, just the first couple characters of what type it is, and then it will give you a list of that autocomplete. It'll show you all the modals, all of the text inputs, or whatever it is. So that's just a naming convention I like to use, but whatever format you use, it really helps to name widgets that you're going to reference in code so that you're not trying to remember what modal1 is or modal2. Just give it something meaningful if you have to reference it. You don't have to name every widget, but definitely the ones that are linking and being used in bindings. So Let's go ahead and add another JSON form here. And I'm going to delete these buttons first because the form has its own. Same with the header. All right, so I'm going to drag in a new JSON form. And then to connect the data here, if I try to connect it to table 1, so it's connected to the selected row again, which it's already filled out, and we're trying to create a new row. So instead of using this reference to the selected row, but what I want to do is put in some source data right here with all of the values removed. So what I like to do is populate it for just a second with this selected row, and then copy the evaluated value. So this is taking the reference, kind of the formula, and getting the result. Now I'm going to paste that into here, and we can remove the ID, the order column. We don't want that. And let me get rid of this description. We're going to make that empty quotes. Same with the department, budget here. And we're totally getting rid of the apply for position column. And I think that's it. I'm going to wrap this whole thing in double curly braces just so we get the formatting there. But you want to put in an object here that's a placeholder for the empty form, and then just remove those text values. And if it is a Boolean field, then you can put a placeholder of false, or you could default it to true or null. The budget, it looked like it thinks this is a text column, but we want a number. So I'm going to use a 0 here. And then on our budget field of the JSON form, it looks like that changed to a number as soon as I changed the source data. So that one updated for us. So we have a text input. We got the toggle here for if it's filled for the Boolean field. Another text. Here on the department, let's go make that one a select. And we'll go into the settings here, change this to a select. And then I've got that value that we pasted in earlier. We'll use that same list. So we'll paste in that value that we used earlier. And now we've got our drop-down list here for the select widget. So we got just about everything done. We just need a new API to create a new row, link that to the form, and then connect that to the button. So we'll go back to the docs here. And if we are creating a new row, it's a post. Here's the rest of the URL. All right, I'm going to go back to the data source, add a new API. We'll make it a post, put the rest of the URL there, and we'll call it create position. Okay, and then the body. So here we want to reference that form for creating a row. And this is why you really want to name everything. I've got JSON form 2, JSON form 1 down here. So it can get hard to remember each form, what it's being used for. So let's go name those first. Here's the one for editing. So this JSON form, let's rename it to JForm. Let's see, this is update. And then the one that creates a row comes up from this button. So JSON form 2. Oh, I'm inside the field here. So if you're in that setting, it remembers what field you're in, and you might have to back out to get to the top level there. So we'll rename this one. This is create. Okay, back to the API now that we know which form is which. And so right here, we want to create a new row, pulling data from the JSON form that's for creating a row. So we got jform create position dot form data. That's coming from the user. Source data is what populated the form to begin with, and that's empty. Form data is empty for now, but if we go over here, and just test this out. So now when I click submit, we got to link that button still, but we can send this data through the API. So let's connect the button. We're on the create position form and go to its event. So on submit, we want to create a position. And then just like before, we want to see the change. Got to see the new row has been added. So the on success callback is to get positions. And then it's going to have one more level to the callback here just to close this modal. So close modal, and then its name, which is modal create position. And we got to go fix the other one because I renamed a modal. So here, JSON form for creating. Let's test this out, but in a minute here, I got to fix that other field name because we renamed one. So let's see. Now when I click submit, let's see if we get a new row. Okay. And there it is. So it created the new row. It ran the get request to repopulate the table. And then it also closed the modal so we could see the change. We got to fix the other modal though, because this submit button, it has a callback down here on the get positions and it's still called modal 1. So I linked this first and then we renamed them. So what I want to do is name this modal. And then I'll copy that name to this button here for the update form. So for the JSON form back here, where we run the update query first, then you get all the rows to see the change, and then we've got the callback to close the right modal. So that should get that working again. All right, I think that's it. We've got everything we need to create, read, update, and delete records in Baserow. We saw how to create an authenticated API data source to securely save those credentials on the server. And we looked at 3 different ways to create an API and then 3 ways to connect that data to the table widget. So I hope this has been helpful. That's it for this week's workshop. If you have ideas for other workshops or any questions on this one, feel free to drop a comment below. Thanks again for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you next week.